and lecturer. Each week, Lawline will bring you the most knowledgeable experts in the field of law today. And now, we introduce our guests and our host, Alan Schnorman.
Welcome to Lawline. Should the victim of a rape be allowed to find out the HIV status of her assailant? How does the law strike a balance between the rights of victims of violent crimes and the confidentiality of the criminal defendant? Today we'll examine this issue with Catherine Hansens, Director of the AIDS Project at Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund, and Dennis Safran, the New York Regional Director of the American Alliance for Rights and Responsibilities. Hello, Catherine. Hello, Dennis.
Hello.
Catherine, what is now the bill that's pending in the legislature regarding AIDS and testing?
Well, there are a couple of bills that are floating around right now, and one of them calls for testing not only of persons who are convicted of violent crimes, but persons who are also charged, in other words, just accused of committing a range of offenses from criminal, violent criminal assaults to
rape be included?
Well, rape is actually, New York has had a law in effect for over a year now that allows for testing of persons convicted of rape. This would expand it to those persons not only charged with those crimes, but charged with disorderly persons offenses. So, for example, if your grandmother was protesting cuts in Medicare and a cop grabbed her and she spit at the officer, he could, under the current bill, drag her off and have her asked to have her tested for HIV.
Well, actually, Catherine, in the current version of the bill, that's been eliminated.
Well,
it
there's
no longer
actually
applies to disorderly
no.
conduct.
Actually, there's the bill that was introduced, I believe, in the Senate a day or two ago. Also allows corrections officers to allow testing of inmates who throw spit or throw body fluids on them. So there's still a provisions in bills that are being proposed and are being endorsed by both sides that would allow testing of persons who spit.
And what bill that'll go? They're the one that'll come out of the assembly.
And what's your organization's position on these type of bills regarding testing?
We've worked with Assemblyman Steve Kaufman and Assemblywoman Nettie Mayerson to help put forward these bills.
You're in favor of the bills. Why?
We're in favor of the concept. Because I start with the observation of Professor George Fletcher at Columbia Law School that an appropriate and a fundamental obligation of the criminal justice system is to stand by the victims of crime, to express solidarity with those who have been the victims of violence in American society, and to help restore their dignity. That is what these bills do, and they do it in a reasonable and balanced way. The bill that is currently before the State Assembly would provide for HIV testing of certain criminal defendants only in the case of certain specified
accused, right?
violent
Not convicted.
crimes.
Not convicted, but accused. Is that correct?
That's right, accused, because
So
otherwise
in other words,
it serves no
if we're in the middle of
purpose.
a divorce, say you and I are married and it gets ugly.
Right.
So I might decide that in the course of this to say that after we separated that you have forced yourself on me, and I also believe that you have been consorting with prostitutes, so that in the context of a criminal divorce proceeding I could also seek to have you tested. In fact, if I accuse you of raping me, you don't even get a hearing as to whether or not you committed the crime.
Is that correct?
No, it's not correct.
Oh, it
Under the
absolutely
current
is
bill,
correct. It
you
absolutely
have
is
to have
correct.
an indictment or other probable cause determination. What Catherine is saying is the victim can just say, he raped me, and there's an AIDS test the next minute. No, there has to be an indictment or other probable cause determination.
If you're charged with the crime, if there's probable cause to indict, you could be tested.
If there's probable cause to indict.
Regardless of the context. I think that it's important there's one point that I really like to make at the outset, that I think that the dichotomy that's being set up here as supporting the victim's rights versus the defendant's rights is a false one. And in fact, one of the things that Lambda and other groups have put forward is a real measure to protect the health of victims. And if I think that at a time when funding for rape crisis centers is being cut, at a time when women whom I speak with who have experienced criminal assault find the system incredibly unresponsive, find that they have a terrible time getting reimbursed for medical expenses, I would really like to see legislators who claim to care about that make sure we have legislation that makes sure that victims of crime don't have to assume the costs of necessary medical care, and also listens to what doctors who treat these people say is important, and that is to find out whether
Catherine,
they have been
excuse me.
exposed.
Catherine, can you respond to this? But let's assume a woman is a victim of a rape.
Okay.
And of course, she's terrified in more ways than
Absolutely.
she's traumatized and terrified. Wouldn't she have a right to know whether or not the assailant is infected with the AIDS?
Well, I mean, as a legal matter, no. But I think, let me tell you the reasons related to her
I was talking about her own anxiety.
No, that's what let me talk about that, because I think there is, I mean, people have anxieties about a variety of things. A lot of people have, I think that her anxiety, her fear about exposure, absolutely legitimate.
Sure.
Nobody would discount that. I would be the last person to do it based on my own personal experience. But I think what's important is to rely not on misinformation, but what doctors who treat people with AIDS, or doctors who see people who say, my God, doctor, I think I've been exposed to HIV, what should I do? What they tell them. And what they tell them, and the reason why rape crisis centers, when we were dealing with this bill in New Jersey, came out as a group statewide and opposed this kind of legislation, is because focusing on the status of the rapist, the accused, whether he's accused, whether he's convicted, is not helpful. It may have there may be a punitive reason why we want to focus on that person, and that's perfectly understandable too. But knowing anything about that person's status is not helpful to the victim for a couple of reasons. For one thing, the tests that we have are not going to tell us unless we get that person at the point of infection, at the point of contact, and isolate them and make sure that they are going to have no contact with anybody, and then repeatedly test them. We're not going to know whether this person was infected at the time of the incident. And then, even if we were able to confirm that in a time that makes sense to deal with the immediate concern of the victim, we have no way of knowing whether or not the virus was transmitted. The likelihood that even if this person had HIV, that it was transmitted to the victim in one single contact is very rare. So we need her to know, are you exposed to illness?
The bill before the legislature, the version that's coming out now, would provide for testing only when there is medically informed opinion that there is a reasonable possibility that there could have been transmission to the victim, to that rape victim, in the course of the commission of the crime.
But why not? Then, if that's, I think I agree with that part. I agree that there should be testing, that we should allow public health experts and physicians to say, okay, what happened here is a kind of incident where there is at least a theoretical possibility, a reasonably good possibility, that transmission occurred. So why don't we say, for that reason, we are going to make sure that when this person shows up at a police precinct, that we're going to make sure that this person gets immediately referred to someone who can provide testing. We're going to make sure that this person doesn't have to use his or her own insurance, so that there's a record of this test. We're going to make sure that the state has the state-of-the-art technology that's available to this victim, and then if this person is convicted, we're going to make darn sure that they compensate that victim for every single expense that the state may have incurred to ensure that.
The current version of the Kaufman bill does all that. It provides for state funding, counseling and state funding for PCR testing, which is the most advanced testing for the victim, but PCR testing isn't enough. It won't tell you definitely.
It'll tell you in 10 days.
No, it will not. That is wrong.
That is right.
It will not tell you for an average of 3 weeks, and that's an average, and it will not tell you with certainty for approximately 3 months.
No, I'm sorry. There was actually...
Just getting back to the victim, if I may.
Sure.
Now, let's take the same precinct that you just mentioned. The victim is brought to the precinct, am I correct? And the victim is the one who you want tested.
Well, let's say she comes in and reports, yeah.
Of course, she's been through tremendous trauma already.
Right.
And what I'm trying to see whether or not can alleviate is any additional trauma. Now, of course, it's your position that you do not want the assailant tested under any circumstances. Is that correct?
No, I'm saying if No, what I'm saying is the reason why it's legally questionable to do this is because you have to show that what you're doing, this search of this defendant or this convicted person, is directly connected to your goal, which is helping the victim. Now, if you're saying, I hope you're not saying that we don't want to make a victim get tested because that's like punishment, because that would completely undermine...
No, that may be unreliable, is just what I'm saying. You're talking about from the precinct that the victim gets tested.
Oh, no, not tested there. I'm saying wherever that person is going to show up and say, something terrible has happened to me, that those people are going to be trained to make sure that she gets to an approved clinic, hospital to immediately care for
It's my understanding there's a period of incubation where even if you're confronted with an HIV positive person, if I'm tested minutes afterwards or hours afterwards or even days after, it may not show up at all.
That's right.
But you're assuming a couple of things. You're assuming that all persons who are raped or assaulted are not themselves HIV positive. You're assuming that the virus only travels in one direction.
I think that's a legitimate assumption that we can make for these purposes. If Catherine is trying to say, oh, the rape victims probably were HIV positive.
No, I'm not saying probably. I'm saying that you're making assumptions
I think we can make a reasonable assumption that 99% of the cases,
that's an extraordinary thing. That's an extraordinary thing about what you think about HIV.
Is Lambda, is it your position you're against any testing of any in any form?
No, what I am saying is our position is that to date there is no demonstrated reason based on what we consult with public health officials and we consult with physicians, infectious disease doctors, in putting together our policies to make sure that positions that we take on the law are consistent with what we know about medical science. And our position is that to date there has been no demonstrated benefit to mandatory involuntary testing in any context that supports the goal that's being put forward.
How about peace of mind of the victim? That's not a demonstrated benefit?
But it's wrong peace of mind. It's incorrect peace of mind, which is why a lot of rape crisis centers oppose this.
Like in the case of, we'll take not a rape, but the case of little Colette Lopez, the 6-year-old stabbed with a hypodermic needle on the subway. Her peace of mind, you're just going to dismiss it as wrong peace
absolutely.
of mind.
What's amazing about this, what's amazing about that particular test is that if you contact the doctors at the hospital where she presented, they will tell you that, well, we have a PCR, yes, we have it here available, but there wasn't any blood on the needle, there was no reason to test her. Current PCR testing could, at this moment, confirm whether or not that little girl was infected.
At this moment,
yeah,
3 months later.
And it could have confirmed the most recent reports on studies that were issued in the last month and a half in the New England Journal of Medicine and the Journal of the American Medical Association.
And we're going to continue. We have to go to a break right now, but right after the break, let me ask you the different forms. If someone bites you, has that been shown that you can get HIV
let's talk about it.
Right after the break? You're watching Lawline. I'm Alan Schnorman, your host. Stay with us.
I'm so flustered.
Hello, I'm Alan Schnorman, the host of Lawline, and I want to give you some important information about your legal rights. If you were seriously injured in an automobile, a fall down, or construction accident, you may be entitled to a substantial money award for your pain and suffering. It is important to speak to a knowledgeable attorney in that field. At my firm, Solomon & Schnorman, our practice is limited to personal injury law. We fight for the rights of accident victims. Don't try to evaluate the case yourself. If you have any questions about your accident, call us at 1-800-LAWLINE. If you're too injured to come to our office, we will come to you. The consultation is free, and we only get paid when your case is settled or won. Remember, the insurance companies have lawyers protecting their interests, and so should you. Hello, you're watching Lawline. I'm Alan Schnorman, your host. Today we're talking about AIDS and AIDS testing and what bills are pending in the state legislature. Before the break, I'd asked Catherine Hansons, who is head of the AIDS project of the Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund, tell me about the different ways one can transmit AIDS in a crime situation? What about biting? Can you get, I'm bitten by someone who has AIDS?
There is one disputed case in Florida where an elderly man was bitten by a prostitute. He claimed that he was bitten a couple of times, that it broke the skin, and that he tested seropositive later. It is not, I have to say that there's a lot of dispute around that case. It's not clear. I don't think it's been confirmed whether they ruled out, in fact, whether there was a prior relationship.
Sexual intercourse.
Oh, definitely.
Anal intercourse, I know from...
Anal intercourse, yes. Vaginal intercourse, yes.
Infected needles.
Absolutely.
What other methods?
Perinatally, vertically from mother to children.
Okay.
There are some cases of healthcare workers who have been exposed to a substantial inoculation of blood through hollow bore needles that contain blood. There have been fewer than 50, but a measurable number of healthcare workers.
Let's talk about mothers to children, prenatally. Right now, I know there is anonymous testing, just for statistical purposes, of babies.
That's right.
What is your group's position about letting the mothers know if their baby has AIDS?
I think that it's an excellent idea to counsel all mothers and to offer her that information.
All mothers. I'm talking about the mother whose child has proven to have AIDS. Should you tell the mother?
I think that all women should be offered that information.
But why
Yes.
do you oppose disclosure?
I think
we do
we
testing now of every baby.
Because it is, the screening that is in place was put in place as a tool to identify areas where financial and medical resources are necessary. It is completely unsound to institute a screening policy and then turn around and try to flip that into serving another purpose. I think that if you want to have mandatory testing, or if you want to do that, you have to identify the reasons why you think that simply offering women a test voluntarily is not a good idea.
The bottom line is, currently in New York, we send babies home from the hospital with AIDS. We know it. We don't tell their mothers. We don't tell their doctors.
I guess the question
That's
is, why haven't the physicians...
How do you get around that?
What do you mean, how do you get around that? Why aren't physicians offering this information to women? Are you saying that women are refusing?
By the law that you
That's
support,
absolutely
they're
not true.
prohibited
Every
from
single
offering
physician can offer a voluntary test to a
another
woman.
test. Yes, they offer to do another test, but we're talking about a population that's very poor, very uneducated.
It's covered. If it's poor, then it's covered.
It's often not in a position to take advantage of this.
At the same
Nonetheless,
time,
we know and we don't give them the information.
Excuse me, one second.
Silly.
Let's
That's
clarify.
absolutely silly.
Let's clarify, if we may, what we're talking about. The baby has AIDS. Obviously, the mother doesn't know that she has AIDS.
We don't know that. We don't know that.
We're just giving an example, just as an example. Baby comes in positive for AIDS, for HIV positive,
Correct.
which of course means that the mother, I assume, has...
That's all.
It means, it means the mother is definitely HIV positive, and there's a 1 in 4 chance that the baby will be.
Okay. What?
That's correct.
Now, as the current law now is, the doctor cannot tell
That's correct.
the mother
Cannot
that
tell.
the baby
Because it does-
Or it's the state. The state can't even tell the doctor. The doctor doesn't know.
No one can tell the mother that the baby who they've tested is HIV positive.
Has a 1 in 4 chance of being HIV positive.
Because
That's correct.
the thing that makes me crazy about this is because it's so misleading. It says there is this screening that's done. It's done, the reason we have 100% participation is because people are told at the outset, when this whole screening program was adopted, that we have 100% participation because we are simply anonymously screening to find out where the concentration of the virus is most significant. This in no way, absolutely in no way, prevents a doctor in every single case where a woman who is pregnant crosses his or her threshold to say, you know what, I think it would be a great idea if you had an antibody test. This is how you're going to plan for your kid.
So the onus is on the woman. The woman has to.
Women have brains. I think it's all.
Yes,
No, she
of course
doesn't.
women have
No, it
brains.
doesn't. I think. No,
you're
it isn't.
still
The onus
placing
is
the
not
onus
on
on her.
Oh, for
Yeah.
God's sakes! The onus is on the physician as a medical practitioner to give that woman the information that some doctors are women. She has to provide that person, and if they have a relationship, the overwhelming majority of women, if they trust the physician, will agree to do that.
Who is it? Is it testing done by the doctor or by the hospital? Is it separate?
It's done by the hospital.
Okay,
the
so the
doctor
doctor
is not
doesn't even
involved
know.
in that.
Can there be some form that the mother says that if my baby is found to be positive, that I am informed?
Under the new regulations that Governor Pataki has proposed, and that will go into effect on May 1st, women who request the results will get them. So we have taken care of the most absurd situation under the current law.
If I'm the mother and I want to know,
The governor is taking care of that, but I understand that Ms. Hansen's group and other groups are going to sue to block even that
We're not actually
forward step toward rationality.
Lambda actually isn't involved in that litigation at all, but I think
that's reassuring to hear.
The part of the proposed regulation, particularly because of the guidelines that were proposed in the settlement agreement that left the whole party that represents the women in this out, is that a doctor can determine that there is an emergency if he decides that there's a risk factor, like this woman had unprotected sex some point in her past, to test a baby and get the results without the woman's permission.
let's talk about medical providers and testing. Here, does a doctor who is, let's assume, operates on patients all day long, does he have the right to know whether or not the patient he's operating on is HIV positive?
No.
Not under current law.
And it should make a difference. What would he do differently? What would the doctor do differently if this person has HIV? Refuse care? I hope not. That's illegal. Put on gloves? Hope not. Hope the doctor's wearing them from the get-go.
Universal precautions.
Absolutely. The Centers for Disease Control has been saying this for over a decade, that we treat every single person that we encounter as if they had HIV because there is no way of knowing.
What about in the circumstance when the medical provider is in contact? Let's assume he cuts himself or she cuts himself with a scalpel and blood is exchanged between the patient and the doctor. Does then the doctor have the right to know whether or not the patient is HIV positive?
No, I mean, the doctor can ask. The doctor can certainly ask, but there aren't any situations of transmission in that particular setting. What would make sense is for the doctor, for everybody who's had an exposure, the doctor and the patient to be tested afterwards. It's not very likely, but if you want to rule it out, you test yourself.
Catherine, where are we going now? Tell us about the background with AIDS. Is AIDS still progressing at the same rate it was years ago, or is it leveled off?
That's an interesting question. It really depends on the population that we're talking about. In some ways, the level of new infections has leveled off across the board, because the folks that you see now that are developing AIDS are, for the most part, people that were infected over a decade ago.
Right.
So it's very hard to tell by AIDS cases today what the current infection rate is, because we're not doing across-the-board screening to find incidents, which we should be doing and which we could do if people were sure that they weren't going to turn that around into a mandatory testing thing where their names are reported. But what we are finding is that there is the really big increases are among women. Women are one of the fastest growing groups of persons infected with HIV, and adolescents, kids. High school kids.
Well, what's happening, though, with the homosexual community? Is that leveled off or on the decrease?
That has actually, there has been a slight resurgence, but I would say that as in terms of the groups who have the highest rate of increase, that is not one of the groups.
So now it's basically, between the sexes, between sexual intercourse, is that now the main source of AIDS?
Well, again, it depends on the state. It depends on the state. I wouldn't say I would say in terms of new infections.
Right.
The women, whether it's through sex with an intravenous drug user or somebody who's bisexual, or through intravenous use themselves, are the highest growing group. But in New Jersey, ever since the beginning of the epidemic, the highest number, the largest proportion of persons diagnosed with AIDS or infected with AIDS were IV drug users. It was not gay
Are there
men.
any statistics about a man and woman have sexual intercourse, that it's easier for a woman to get AIDS than a man?
Yes, there are. I mean, it's the receptive person. The woman in most cases is statistically at greater risk from vaginal intercourse than the man.
Are there any statistics that where if I have sex with a particular woman, if I have it one time, maybe it's a 1 in 100 chances of getting HIV or higher?
Oh, less than that. Oh, less than that. In fact, in a single encounter, and I'm talking about vaginal sex now. Okay, one single sexual encounter with someone who is HIV positive, it is less than 0.1% that in that single incident, that you will contract HIV. So it's not, I'm always nervous saying this because I want to, say what is true about this, that it's not the easiest disease in the world to catch, but I also don't want people to think that it is therefore safe to have unprotected heterosexual sex. Clearly it is not. And clearly, unless you're psychic and you know absolutely everything your sexual partner has done since the point they became sexually active. And it's not safe to
What about oral sex?
That there is some evidence that it is a means of transmission, but it is not believed to be a particularly effective means of transmission. So it's considered a lower risk than vaginal or anal intercourse.
But a means of transmission.
Possible, yeah.
Okay.
Possible.
Dennis, your group now, as far as testing, what's your position regarding testing in general?
It's hard to say about testing in general. Our position is we strongly support testing in certain limited situations of criminal defendants and situations where there is a reasonable possibility that they could have transmitted HIV to an innocent victim by committing a crime. We also strongly favor disclosure of the HIV status of babies that the state knows, the state tests for now, to mothers and doctors.
What's your opinion regarding testing of certain target groups?
Which you have to particularly...
I don't know.
I'm not for testing across the board. I'm not for, regardless of what some people might tell you, I'm certainly not for rounding up people and bringing them in and testing them. Our group has taken a position on two particular issues where I think you have a crying need for testing in order to help and to assuage the fears of innocent people. I am not...
What about doctors? Would you be in favor of testing for doctors? Are there patients?
We haven't taken a position on that, and I don't necessarily disagree with what Catherine said.
Yes.
No. No. And the overwhelming number of medical associations agree with me on that.
Yeah. The point is, we take a middle ground position on this.
Catherine, quickly, in summation, what would you like to tell the public?
The best way to take care of yourself and your loved ones is to make sure you know your antibody status, so get tested.
Dennis?
The onus should not be placed on the victims of crime.
And a test is not a means of punishment.
Catherine Hansen, thank you very much for appearing on Lawline as the Director of AIDS Project of the Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund, and Dennis Safran, the Regional Director of the American Alliance for Rights and Responsibilities. Thank you for appearing on Lawline. And as always, this is Alan Schnorman. Thank you for watching Lawline.
You have been watching Lawline with your host, New York trial attorney Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman will be back with you next week at the same time. If you have any questions about this week's program, please write to Lawline, 63 Wall Street, New York, New York, 10005, or call area code 212-432-9111. This program was made possible by the law firm of Zalman and Schnorman, whose practice is limited to personal injury and insurance law.